It had been years since humanity had been forgotten. The galaxy had moved on, and the people of Earth were left in silence. The great wars of old were over, and the once strong human fleets had disappeared into the dark corners of space. But Earth had never forgotten the betrayals. They had been cast aside, ignored, and forgotten by those who once called them allies. Now it was time for revenge. The message came in the dead of night. It was a single transmission, a voice that echoed across the stars. "We were your allies once. You betrayed us. Now we are coming back to finish what you started." At first, no one believed it. The galaxy had long since written humanity off. Earth was just a small, insignificant planet. But that voice, it was real. It was from Earth, and it was filled with fury. On a distant world, the leader of the human resistance stood at the front of a command center. The old warships, long abandoned in deep space, were being brought back to life. Old soldiers, engineers, and civilians who had once known war were now coming together to fight once more. The leader, a man who had once been a simple mechanic on Earth, now stood at the head of an army. His eyes were cold, filled with purpose. The time for hiding was over. The time for revenge had come. "Get the fleet ready," he ordered, his voice steady. "We've waited long enough. They will pay for what they did." Across the galaxy, the human fleet began to stir. The dormant ships, hidden away for years, powered up. These were no ordinary ships. They had been built during the golden age of humanity, powerful and sleek, capable of destroying entire fleets in minutes. The fleet's new commander knew they were rusty, but they would have to do. They would fight, and they would win. One by one, the ships left the safety of their hidden bases, their engines roaring as they powered up into the cold, empty space. The fleet was not large, but it was hungry. The humans had learned to survive in the dark corners of the galaxy, and now they were ready to strike back. Back on Earth, the people waited in silence. The world had changed in the years since the wars ended. Earth was no longer the mighty empire it once was, but the spirit of the human race was not dead. The people had been forced to adapt, to live without the support of the greater galaxy, but they never lost their will. In the crowded streets, small groups of people whispered in corners, wondering if the rumors were true. Had humanity really risen from the ashes? Were the ships in the sky really the harbingers of their revenge? The leader of the human fleet had been born a simple mechanic, a person who fixed things, who worked with his hands. He had been one of the few survivors when the galaxy had turned its back on Earth. Now, he had become the face of humanity's last stand. The first target was an enemy world, a planet that had been one of the most vocal in condemning humanity to its fall. The humans were not interested in making peace. They didn't come to negotiate. They came to destroy the ones who had wronged them. The fleet approached the planet's atmosphere with the quiet hum of their ships cutting through the silence. The crew members stood at their posts, their faces tense. Some had never fought in a war. Others had only heard stories from the elders about what it was like. Now, they would see for themselves. The fleet had no choice but to win. "We do this for Earth," the leader said over the intercom, his voice filled with pride and anger. "We do this for the people we lost. We do this for revenge." The fleet moved forward as one, their weapons locked and ready. The planet-side defenses began to blink red as they detected the incoming ships. There was no turning back now. Back in the enemy command center, leaders scrambled. Their sensors had picked up the human fleet's arrival. They had heard the rumors too, the stories of the humans rising from the shadows. But they never truly believed it. They thought the humans were weak, forgotten. They had thought wrong. "They're here," one officer gasped as he looked at the readout. "How is this possible? The humans. They've come back." The enemy forces were already beginning to prepare for the battle. But they were unprepared. The humans were not the same as before. They were no longer a people begging for help. They were a force of nature, ready to tear the galaxy apart to claim what was theirs. The first shots were fired. The enemy ships fired with all their might, but the human fleet responded with ruthless efficiency. The first wave of firepower knocked the defending ships off course. It was just the beginning. On board the human flagship, the leader gave the order to attack. The massive ship shuddered as its guns came to life, launching powerful blasts that tore through enemy defenses. The enemy fleet was strong, but humanity had something they didn't: rage. They thought we were weak. The leader said, his eyes never leaving the view screen. Now they'll learn. We are human. We fight to the end. The human fleet surged forward, cutting through the enemy forces like a blade through soft flesh. The message was clear: no one would be left standing. As the battle raged on, the leader's heart beat with a mix of anger and determination. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight to show the galaxy that humanity would never be forgotten again. This was the beginning of the end, and Earth's revenge had only just begun. The human fleet sailed deeper into enemy space, their mission clear: exact revenge and show the galaxy the strength of the people they had long forgotten. But what they found waiting for them was not what they expected. The galaxy had changed. It was no longer a place of power and glory. It was broken. Entire worlds, once proud and full of life, lay in ruin, their cities shattered, their defenses crippled. The commander, once a simple mechanic, stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolute, looking at the war-torn remains of the galaxy. His face, set in grim determination, softened for just a moment. This was not the battle he had prepared for. The galaxy was a shadow of what it had been, and the cause of its downfall was clear: greed and betrayal. We didn't just fight wars, the commander muttered, staring at the damaged planets. We fought each other. Around him, the crew continued their work. The enemy had made their choice long ago, but now it seemed they had paid the price. The humans weren't the only ones who had suffered. The galaxy had fallen into disarray, torn apart by its own hubris. Entire systems had been wiped out in power struggles, with once mighty civilizations reduced to dust. The question on everyone's mind was simple: how did it come to this? But the commander knew this was no time for questions. The past was behind them. The humans were here to settle a score, and they would not be distracted. On a distant planet, a group of rebel leaders gathered. They were a mix of the last survivors of the old order, now working together to fight against the oppressive forces that had taken over the galaxy. Many had hoped to rebuild, to find peace again, but peace was a dream long forgotten. What had started as a series of small rebellions had now turned into a full-scale war for survival. A woman, once a high-ranking officer in the Galactic Coalition, looked out the window at the approaching fleet. She had heard the rumors, just like everyone else. The humans were back. "What do we do now?" she asked, turning to her comrades. "We fight," one of the men replied. His voice was heavy with the weight of their losses. "We fight because we don't have a choice. The humans won't stop until they've taken everything from us." But the woman's thoughts were not on the humans. They had their vengeance. She feared something far worse. If the humans arrived in full force, the chaos would only spread further. There was no telling what could happen if they reached the heart of the enemy's power. She had seen what happened when people like them turned desperate. As the human fleet continued its journey, the commander's thoughts remained sharp and focused. His fleet was small but deadly, and they had learned from their past mistakes. Their weapons were built for precision, and their crews were determined to prove that they were not the weak, forgotten species they had been portrayed as. They were survivors. The fleet arrived at their first target, a planet that had once been the shining jewel of the galaxy. Now it was a charred, empty wasteland, its cities nothing more than ruined skeletons. There was no life left, no resistance to stop them. The humans didn't hesitate. The commander gave the order to land. As the ships touched down, the battle was over before it had even begun. The enemy forces had either been wiped out or fled. The human fleet had crushed their first target, but it didn't bring the satisfaction they expected. "This is just the beginning," the commander said quietly, his eyes scanning the desolate world. "We came here for revenge, but what we find is much bigger than us." The humans had come for payback, but they hadn't expected to find a galaxy already on the edge of collapse. Every corner of space they traveled through revealed a new story of destruction, of power-hungry leaders and enemies that turned on each other. The more they fought, the more they realized that their war was just a small part of a much bigger picture. The human fleet moved steadily through the galaxy, their next target in sight. It had been weeks since their first strike, and the commander could feel the weight of their actions. Each victory brought them closer to their goal, but the deeper they traveled, the more they saw just how broken the galaxy had become. Entire worlds lay in ruins, and the enemy they had once known now seemed like shadows of their former selves. The commander's mission was clear: to take vengeance for Earth and make sure no one forgot humanity ever again. But something gnawed at him. Was this really the right fight? The enemy fleet was not far now, a massive armada built over years of conquest. But something felt different about this battle. The humans had the element of surprise on their side, but the enemy had numbers, something they hadn't faced yet. The enemy forces were gathering at a planet on the edge of the galaxy, a place humanity had long abandoned after the wars. The commander stood at the bridge of the Resolute, staring out at the stars. His crew was silent, all knowing that the moment they reached the enemy fleet, there would be no turning back. There was no room for mistakes. He turned to his second-in-command, a young officer who had never seen battle before. She stood tall, but the fear in her eyes was hard to miss. "Ready, Captain?" the commander asked. "Yes, sir. All systems are go," the officer replied, though her voice betrayed a hint of worry. The commander nodded. "It's going to be a tough fight. But remember, we're not just fighting for us. We're fighting for everyone who's been forgotten by the rest of the galaxy." As they approached the enemy stronghold, the tension among the crew grew. The vastness of space was overwhelming, and the sight of an entire enemy fleet waiting to meet them was enough to make even the most experienced soldier hesitate. The commander could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he steeled himself. "Prepare for battle," he ordered. "We've come too far to turn back now." The enemy ships loomed large on the view screen, their weapons primed and ready. The enemy knew they were coming. The battle would be brutal. But humanity had the one thing the enemy didn't: the will to win. The first shots rang out, bright flashes of light cutting through the darkness of space. The human fleet fired with precision, their weapons tracking the enemy ships one by one. The commander stood still, watching, his mind clear. He knew this was their moment. The humans had to win. The enemy retaliated, their fleet moving in unison. The battle had begun in earnest. On the surface of the planet below, the last remnants of enemy soldiers gathered in their final stronghold, waiting for the inevitable. They had fought long and hard to keep the galaxy under their control, but now it was slipping away. News of the human fleet's arrival had spread like wildfire, and the soldiers knew they were facing a force unlike any other. Inside the command center, a high-ranking officer paced back and forth, his face drawn with worry. The humans had arrived, and their battle cry had already been heard across the galaxy. "They're stronger than we thought," the officer muttered, fear creeping into his voice. "We've underestimated them." The battle was becoming more intense by the minute, and the officer knew that their time was running out. There was no escaping the human wrath. Their ships were relentless, cutting through the enemy defenses like a hot knife through butter. It was clear that the humans had prepared for this. They had learned from their mistakes and were fighting for survival. Back aboard the Resolute, the battle raged on. The enemy fleet had launched their final counterattack, bringing everything they had to bear on the humans. But the human fleet was prepared. The commander watched with a sharp eye, directing the attack as his crew worked together seamlessly. "Fire all weapons," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the battle. The massive guns of the flagship roared to life, sending shockwaves through space as they ripped through the enemy ships. Each hit was a small victory, each explosion a reminder of why they had come. Humanity had been pushed too far, and now they would make their enemies pay. Back on the planet, the last hope for the enemy lay in their hidden underground bases. The commander of the enemy forces, once a powerful leader, now stood in the darkened halls of his command center. He watched the battle unfold above, the human ships continuing their merciless assault. "We can still win this," the officer said, his voice shaking. "We just need to." A loud explosion cut him off, shaking the entire building. The lights flickered, and alarms blared, signaling the end was near. The battle had ended, but the consequences were far from over. The human fleet stood victorious over the scattered remnants of the enemy armada, their ships floating through the wreckage of the once great force. For a moment, everything seemed quiet. The sound of gunfire and explosions had stopped, and the only noise was the hum of the Resolute's engines. But the commander knew this was far from peace. The real reckoning was about to begin. Inside the flagship, the crew worked tirelessly to assess the damage. The battle had been hard fought, and though they had emerged victorious, many ships had taken heavy damage. Still, their victory wasn't just about destruction. It was about sending a message. Humanity had risen from the ashes of its past, and now they would take their place among the stars, not as victims, but as conquerors. The commander stood in the center of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the view screen. His mind raced, trying to process everything they had done and everything they had yet to face. They had proven their strength, but what would the rest of the galaxy think? Would they be seen as heroes, or would they be feared as unstoppable warriors? He had no answers, but he knew one thing: this was far from over. On the surface of the planet below, the remnants of the enemy forces had retreated into their underground bunkers. They had fought with everything they had, but it hadn't been enough. Now, they were a broken people, hiding in the shadows of a dying empire. The commander of the enemy forces, once a proud leader, now sat in a darkened chamber, surrounded by his most trusted officers. The air was thick with the scent of defeat, and the silence was suffocating. He had failed. The galaxy had turned against him, and now there was nowhere left to run. "We have lost," the enemy commander said quietly, his voice filled with bitterness. "Humanity has proven its strength. The galaxy will never be the same again." One of his officers spoke up, fear in his voice. "What do we do now, sir? They will come for us. We have no power left." The enemy commander stared at the floor for a long moment. He knew what had to be done, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. The war was over. The humans had won. And now, it was time to face the consequences. "We fight," the commander finally said, his voice cold. "We will not surrender. We may have lost, but we will make them understand that we are not just going to fade into the darkness. We will show them what happens when they provoke us." Back aboard the Resolute, the crew received the news. The enemy had retreated underground, but they weren't giving up. The commander stood in front of his crew, looking out at the stars. His voice was steady, but everyone could sense the weight of the moment. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. "We've taken the first step," the commander said, "but the enemy is not done. They've gone to ground, and they're regrouping. We need to finish this once and for all. We can't allow them to rise again." The crew nodded. They had come this far, and they weren't about to stop now. The commander's words were simple, but they carried a power all their own. Humanity had been underestimated, but now they were unstoppable. The human fleet moved out, their next target in sight, the last stronghold of the enemy, a hidden fortress on the edge of the galaxy. This was it, the final push. The war would be over when they reached it, but the enemy had fortified their position, knowing the humans would come. The battle would be their last stand, and they were prepared to fight to the bitter end. The commander sat in his command chair, his mind focused. The enemy was cornered, and there was no escape for them. This was not just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. The galaxy had been ruled by greed and betrayal for too long. Now, it was time to set things right. "Prepare to engage," the commander ordered. "We take no prisoners." As the human fleet approached the enemy fortress, the sky above the planet erupted in a storm of fire and light. The enemy had not been idle. They had prepared their defenses. The battle that followed was unlike anything the humans had faced before. It was brutal. The enemy fought with desperation, using every weapon at their disposal to slow the human advance. The human ships responded with equal fury. The Resolute fired its weapons with deadly precision, cutting through the enemy's defenses like a blade through flesh. The battle was fierce, but the humans were unrelenting. They were fighting for everything they had lost, for Earth, for their families, and for their future. "Keep pushing forward," the commander shouted, his voice full of determination. "We end this now." On the surface of the planet, the last remaining forces of the enemy made their stand. The enemy commander watched as the human ships continued their relentless assault. There was no escape, no hope. They had failed. "It's over," the commander whispered. His voice was hollow, his spirit broken. "They've won." Above, the human fleet broke through the final defenses of the enemy fortress. The flagship Resolute led the charge, its cannons firing one last time. The enemy's forces crumbled in the face of the human assault. It was done. The war was over. The commander stood on the bridge of his ship, watching as the enemy stronghold was reduced to rubble. The battle was over. The enemy was defeated, but there was no celebration, no cheers. The crew stood in silence, knowing that the cost had been great. Many lives had been lost, and the galaxy was forever changed. "This is just the beginning," the commander said quietly, his voice resolute. "Humanity has proven itself. Now we will take our place in the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as survivors, and no one will ever forget who we are again." The wreckage of the enemy fortress lay scattered across the void, the once imposing structure reduced to nothing but twisted metal and debris. The human fleet hovered in the silence, victorious but battered, their ships slowly drifting in the aftermath of the final battle. The stars above seemed to shine brighter now, as if the universe itself was acknowledging the shift in power. The commander stood at the bridge of the Resolute, his gaze fixed on the destruction. The battle was over. The enemy had been defeated, their once powerful empire now a shadow of its former self. The galaxy was free, but the cost of victory had been steep. Many lives had been lost, and the scars of war would take time to heal. "We did it," the second in command said quietly, standing beside the commander. Her voice was filled with both relief and sorrow. The war was over, but the weight of what they had done hung heavy in the air. The commander nodded, his face stoic. "We've made them remember who we are, but there's much work to be done." The crew had fought bravely, each of them sacrificing something along the way. Some had lost friends, others had lost hope, but together, they had pushed through. They had proven that humanity was more than just a race struggling to survive. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the ship floated among the wreckage, a transmission came through, breaking the silence. It was a message from Earth. The commander opened it, and the face of a woman appeared on the screen. She was older, her face lined with age and wisdom, but there was no mistaking the pride in her eyes. "We've been watching," she said. "You've done it. Earth stands proud today, not as a forgotten world, but as a leader in this galaxy. You've made history, and now, the galaxy will remember us. All of us." The commander paused, his heart swelling with pride. It was a moment he had dreamed of for so long. The people of Earth, the survivors of a long-forgotten world, had come to their own. They had taken their place, not in the shadows of the galaxy, but at its center. "We will rebuild," the commander replied, his voice firm and full of resolve. "Humanity will rise, stronger than ever before. The galaxy will know our name." The crew gathered together on the deck of the Resolute, standing in the quiet, looking out at the stars. The war was over, and though the cost had been great, they had won. Humanity had proven itself, not just through strength, but through unity, perseverance, and an unbreakable spirit. The commander walked to the front of the ship, looking out into the endless expanse of space. There was no going back now. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, and nothing would ever be the same again. He took a deep breath, the weight of the future ahead of him settling on his shoulders. The next chapter of human history was beginning, and it would be one written by their own hands. "We've made our mark," the commander said quietly. "Now, let's see where this journey takes us." And with that, the fleet began to move forward, towards the stars, towards an uncertain future. But they were no longer just a forgotten race. They were humanity, and the universe would never forget them again.